managed to lose 50 kilograms of weight. Previously, I weighed 120 kilograms at a height of 160. That is twice my weight. These were the worst days of my life, but I managed to surpass myself. Want a personal motivation story? Then watch this video and put class. My name is Leah. I was born already a large child. My weight was almost 5 kilos with a height of 50 centimeters. My mother often told me how every month it became more difficult for her to lift me in her arms. In kindergarten, I was considered the plumpest girl. It's not just about the wide bone, as they say. My parents tell me that I had a great appetite. I ate absolutely everything in a row, but unfortunately, our family did not particularly like fruits or vegetables. More often, there was junk food on the table. In addition to meat, there were a lot of flour products and a lot of sweets. I was gaining more and more pounds, and it was getting harder to move. So, by the end of school, I weighed almost 90 kilos. Against the background of thin classmates, I began to feel depressed, although it was as long as I can remember. And then I could not even pick up a beautiful ball gown. I could only fit into a tracksuit, and even the teachers didn't tell me anything about the dress code at school because they saw how fat I was. This pity on the part of the adults only made me feel worse. The family only avoided this topic, but refused to eat healthy food. I dieted 1,000,000 times and broke down, then gained twice as much as I lost. Because of complexes before the prom night, I began to eat even more and gained another 5 kilos. For this reason, I decided not to go there at all. Because I thought too much about my figure, my academic performance was poor. I didn't have any friends, and I didn't play sports, so I didn't even count on a scholarship. 3 of the colleges have denied me admission due to objective reasons. Who needs a student with 0 achievements? My parents were willing to buy my education and pay for college, but I was ashamed of them and myself. I felt worthless. One day, sitting at the TV late at night, eating another batch of buns, I saw on TV a display of beautiful evening dresses and suddenly realized that I don't have any dresses. I've had wide-leg trousers and t-shirts all my life. I stopped and looked at myself in the mirror. At that moment, I saw not only a fat body full of despair, but loneliness for the rest of my life. If I live at this pace, I will not only have no friends, but also love. I was suddenly afraid, and this fear grew with every spoonful of junk food. That night, I kept a notebook for myself where I wrote down my plans, food plan, lifestyle, and goal. I clearly scheduled everything by day of the week so as to not allow myself to snap again. The next day, I signed up for a gym that was far from home. I specifically chose one to walk back and forth. The first day I met the coach, his name was Noah. He understood me without a word and immediately drew up a program of classes. At first, it was very difficult for me. I felt the weight of my body. I was suffering from shortness of breath. My muscles were flabby like jelly. It was difficult for me among people I didn't know. All these new simulators. I didn't know what to do with them. I was very lost. My hands were shaking because I couldn't do it after 2 weeks of classes. So I came out after another failure in the hall and just roared. "Nothing will help me now. I was born fat and I will die fat," I said aloud. At that moment, my coach came up to me. Noah said that working on yourself is the most difficult and showed me his photos. No, it can't be. He was even fatter than me. I weighed 200 kilograms. Only at that moment, I had a wife and child. At some point, I got depressed just like you were eating. I ate everything, but especially a lot of hamburgers. Unbeknownst to me, I had grown so fat that I could no longer walk. Of course, I stopped working, and my wife had to support me, the child, and herself. It was hard for her, but she was silent and worked. I saw it all and hated myself even more. And then I left, so as to not hang a weight on the fragile shoulders of my beloved, he said. I asked what happened next. He said that now I see another person, strong in body and spirit. I showed you the photo, not so that you lose weight, but so that you don't give up. I have changed now. I started earning money by playing sports, but I still can't get my family back because I lost it over the years. I can't go in there now, and you don't give up. Don't make my mistakes before it's too late, he said. These words made me think about a lot. I came home and opened my notebook again. All the next day, I faithfully fulfilled all the tasks of the trainer, not sparing myself or the simulators. When I thought my heart was going to burst from the strain, I would stop, take a deep breath, and start again a few minutes later. My clothes were soaked with sweat, and my lungs were ready to burst with oxygen. But I didn't stop. About a month later, I got on the scales and I saw that I weighed not 120, but 100 kilos! Minus 20 kilos! Yeah! I screamed in tears. I couldn't believe that I had lost as much as 20 kilos in 1 month. It was only at that moment that I noticed that I had been strapping my old pants with a belt for a long time, and my t-shirt was waving like a sail. It's time for you to go shopping, Noah said, smiling. In a rush of joy, I threw myself at him and hugged him. But this was not the limit. The next day, my mother and I went shopping, where I bought a new tracksuit. My mother asked me why I didn't buy a dress like I wanted, but I said I would only do it after I lost another 30 kilos. On the way home, she told me that she and my father were more proud of me than ever. I was happy to hear that. Well then, we went on another level of my diet and exercise. I took a double load. Over time, I noticed that sports became a way of life for me. I no longer wanted to eat unhealthy. Bad mood just because I was almost always happy. I had the pleasure aching pain in the muscles from easy dinner with a salad. Several times I was approached on the street on the way to the gym to get acquainted. Attention from the outside attracted not only elastic ass, I think I shone from the inside. After 2.5 months of intensive training, I achieved my result. My weight was 70 kilograms. After the weigh-in, I invited Noah home to celebrate. I introduced him to my parents. We had a lovely evening. The coach said I was his best student. And at the end of the dinner, my mother gave me a gift. She bought me a black evening dress. The first in my life. It was beautiful. I tearfully hugged my parents, then put on my new clothes as soon as possible. And you know, this dress has become a symbol of the will to win and work on yourself. This feeling when the back zipper closes without any problems in the back and does not cut into the fat is incomparable, I whispered to my mother. Then Noah and I went straight to the club. He said that people should see me today. Now it's time for a new life.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neve. I haven't cut or washed my hair in 10 years. Surprised? I'm like that princess from the cartoon Tangled with long hair. By the way, the length of mine reached 3 meters. Yes, it grows very quickly. Do you want to know why I stopped washing and cutting it? Then put a like, subscribe to our channel, and watch more. When I was born, my mother told me that I already had long hair, and my mother loved it very much. She didn't cut my hair at all and wouldn't let anyone stand next to me with scissors in their hands. She always braided my hair, made ponytails, bunches, bought so many different elastic bands with hairpins. Only my mother washed my hair, combed my hair, made me different masks for density, for growth. She just loved doing it all. Said she had always dreamed that she had the same, but unfortunately, the genes are not the same. When I got a little older, I became interested in experimenting with my appearance, including hairstyles. Then, my hair was already at hip level. Unbeknownst to my mother, I went to a friend's house where they cut it off to my shoulders and immediately we dyed it black from chestnut. Imagine my mother's reaction when she saw me. I knew she wouldn't like it, but not to this extent. She gave me such a thrashing that it didn't seem enough. At first, I tried to argue about my hair, what I want and what I do, and then I saw how my mother had a heart attack because of nerves. I almost lost her. And that night, after she was hospitalized, I promised her that I would never touch my hair again. A year later, my mother died. She had a weak heart. As the doctor said, her death was only a matter of time. The outcome was inevitable. On the day of her funeral, I remembered my promise and stopped brushing and washing my hair because I said I wouldn't touch it again. I was 13 at the time. So that they did not interfere with me, I sometimes braided a braid or two, Honestly, it was difficult to do this, because unbrushed hair is difficult to put in order, but once you've given your word, you must keep it. Especially since the death of my mother was a blow to me, because I have no one else besides her. No brothers, no sisters, no father. She asked a distant relative to look after me. She did it out of a sense of duty, just like me. Otherwise, my life was normal. I went to school, studied a little. I had no friends because many people disdained me because of my dirty head. Sometimes I got lice. I had to suffer a lot to get them out without washing my hair. You may ask if I was disgusted with myself. I'll just say that I'm used to it. I used to braid myself a super tight braid and go like this for 2 weeks. Gradually, my hair grew. Yeah, it was an ordeal, especially in the summer heat. So it took a whole 10 years. My hair, despite the lack of care, was strong, thick, and long. Over the years, I managed to graduate from high school and go to college, where I also became famous for a dirty, long braid. Only one girl deigned to be my friend. Her name was April. It turns out that her family also likes long hair. Of course, not to the same extent as mine, but still. April often asked me how I managed to grow it, and when she found out that I didn't do anything, she didn't disdain. I was surprised, but pleased. Since then, we became friends, and then asked to live together in a dorm. April turned out to be a very kind girl. She always protected me and didn't ask any questions. Once in physical education, we were divided into teams of girls and boys, and we had a running competition. One freak stepped on a strand of hair that fell to the ground, and I fell so hard that I hit my head. The whole class started laughing wildly, and only April stood up for me. She wasn't even afraid to go against our Miss VIP class, Lizzie. She had a tradition of bullying people who were socially inferior to her. In this case, it was me. Lizzie called me a bum and said she would never touch my hair with her foot in her life. April pushed her and Lizzie fell to the ground. I didn't expect this to happen. Lizzie stood up, dusted herself off, and said we'd both answer for it. I was 100 times grateful for such a gesture, but I said that she shouldn't have done it. Now that bitch will definitely not leave us alone. April said it was time to put her in her place. Well, Lizzie wasn't long in coming. The next night, someone broke into our room, tied both our hands, and taped our mouths shut. I was held on both sides. Due to the fact that the room was with the lights off, I couldn't even see his face. But in principle, I guessed from the voice that this is our bitch. That night, Lizzie went overboard. She came up to me while I was being held by 2 or 3 people, grabbed my hair, and cut off my braid. At that moment, I was screaming so hard that my ears were blocked. Chest pain, resentment, despair, anger, all these feelings mixed up and broke me. It wasn't just hair. It was my promise to my dead mother, but who cares? Only April understood me, and when she saw it, she cursed Lizzie and said that she would regret it and pay twice as much. The girls immediately left. I stayed with April. At first, there was silence in the air. Then I could hear my sobs. April calmed me down as best she could, and I knew I hadn't kept my promise. But April said it wasn't really necessary not to touch my hair at all. It was enough that I didn't cut it. And your mother? I think you were responsible for her death. But you're not. The doctor said it was only a matter of time. I'm sure your mother only loved you more than your hair, she said. I cried even more. I may have needed time to accept that thought. A day later, April came up with a plan for revenge. At first, I didn't want to answer, but my friend convinced me that evil is answered with evil, and then we set about implementing the plan. As you all know, revenge is a cold dish. We waited about a month for the talk, rumors, and gossip about my new short but clean hair to subside. By the way, now I look like a normal girl. April and I were lucky to have a new headmaster at the school, and he didn't know anything about the students yet. The fact is that the city day was approaching, and Lizzie's parents are rich sponsors of the holiday. Respectively, their daughter had to perform a song in front of all the citizens. Only, here's the thing, she always sang to the soundtrack. In fact, the songs for her were performed by another girl who signed a non-disclosure contract. The plan matured by itself. So we waited for the holiday, went there, and waited for the performance. Lizzie shone brighter than a New Year's garland that day. When she took the stage, the audience greeted her with loud applause and cheers. Lizzie took a couple of photos on stage, wished everyone a good evening, and started playing music. We waited for her to finish the first verse, and during that time, we managed to get into the tent, where we found wires, a remote control, and a computer. While I distracted the guards with snacks and drinks, April turned off the soundtrack right on the chorus and turned on the microphone. Just at this moment, the millionaire's daughter stopped controlling her emotions and began to sing in her own voice so that she could have strength. All the people were just freaking out from what was happening. She had such a nasty voice that at first, I thought she was doing this on purpose. There was a disappointed, "Whoa, get off the stage, liar!" from the crowd, and then some kids threw tomatoes and banana peels at the stage. Lizzie was hysterical. The host barely got out of the situation, and we were jubilant. This was our victory, which we deserved. Lizzie tried to make claims against us, but couldn't prove it was us. We had a whole month to work out the plan to the smallest detail, to make everything clear without witnesses. Later, we found out that Lizzie's father tried to run for senator, but people accused him of corruption and deception because of his daughter. Everyone wondered, if he had deceived people with his daughter like this, what would happen next? So his reputation was also damaged, which I was very happy about. April and I celebrated with a bottle of champagne. Well, the next day, I went to my mother's grave. For the first time since I lost my hair, I found the courage to show myself to her. I know it sounds stupid, but I'm really embarrassed to show up to her like this. I still believe that she sees and hears everything. Maybe that's why I finally decided to talk about what happened. As if for evil, a heavy rain began to fall. I found her grave, cleaned up, then sat down next to her and started a monologue. I said a lot of things to her, and I apologized 100 times. And then I told her that if she could hear me and wasn't mad about my hair, she should let me know. Suddenly, the rain abruptly changed to the sun, and a rainbow appeared in the sky. I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, but I took it as a good sign, kissed my mom's photo, and went back to the dorm. Who knows, maybe I shouldn't have tormented myself and my hair like this, but it all led me to what is happening now. In principle, I have no regrets. On the other hand, my hair has become so strong and thick that I can easily lift a bag with it. I'm thinking of hauling groceries from the store on it when it grows back. In the meantime, I'm enjoying what I have, or rather, the new friends that April and I made after City Day. Hi everyone, my name is Milena. I had problems with being overweight, and because of this, I grew up with a lot of complexes. Only those who have the same problems will understand what I went through. And you know what? I managed to win, not only the weight, but also myself. And how? I'll tell you now. You will be surprised, but I was not born at all plump. On the contrary, I was a very small baby. My parents were not inclined to fatness. Everyone always envied them, my dad and my mom. Nature rewarded them with growth, gorgeous physique, and I myself envied them, to be honest. Friends prophesied to my parents of beautiful, slim, and strong offspring. They were not mistaken about the strength. At first, everyone said that this little girl would grow up to be the prettiest in the world. Well, yes, at first I was. When I was growing up, I was really cute and pretty, so it seemed to everyone except myself. Eventually, as time passed, I went to school. In the 8th grade, I began to grow dramatically in height. I was tall and thin. I had no butt or chest. A year later, the absence of 2 important parts of the body began to develop complexes in me. They called me the mop, which added fuel to the fire. I stopped communicating with the girls, withdrew into myself, cried every night, and wore the same clothes, a wide sweatshirt and jeans. Every time I came to school, I wanted to hide so that no one would notice me. I often pulled my hood over my head, and I got into the habit of hunching over. All I wanted was for the day to end quickly. I ran home, ate quickly, and locked myself in my room. I didn't want to talk to my parents. I found an excuse that I was terribly tired, and I lay in bed under the covers and cried sometimes until morning. I knew that this world was too harsh and I might not be ready for this kind of challenge. And then, sitting on the internet, I stumbled on an interesting forum. It was all about flat girls, and it naturally caught my attention. I started poking around, reading every message, review, and photo. Then, as I understood, the girls discussed some foreign drug that helped them gain weight in a short time and build up the ass and chest. I thought, that's what I need. It seemed to me that fate itself gave me this link, to which I moved miraculously. I found my salvation, which was infinitely happy for me. Thus, having found the name, instructions, I decided to order it for myself. Secretly from my mother, having saved up money, I purchased this drug. It was in the form of pills, and it was like magic. You drink them and you get an appetite. Due to this, a person quickly gains weight. But I had no idea at the time that you also need to gain weight by following some rules. However, I reached my goal pretty quickly. Within a couple of months, I looked really different. But the horror that happened to me. I ate 8 to 9 times a day, and in between a heavy meal, I carried snacks. That is, chips, cookies, my favorite cakes, sweets, chocolate, and so on. After 2 months, I was able to completely update my wardrobe because, as I wanted, I had a chest, a butt, and a little belly. But it was not terrible for me because I was no longer flat. I grew my hair, changed my hair color to a lighter color, and changed my style of clothing. Now I boldly bought skirts, dresses, and tight jeans with t-shirts. Well, I was happy to see myself different. As soon as I worked a little, my life began to play with new colors. I had friends again, I became more relaxed, confident, sociable, and I knew that now I was sexy. Soon, I even had a boyfriend. And he was a real hunk. I met him at one of the parties with friends. His name was Dave, and he was tall, dark, and had a nice body. He was crazy about my figure, and we fell for each other in just a couple of dates. He was my first love, and I thought I was the happiest person in the world. So we started dating. My parents were just happy to see me happy, and at some point, I decided that I could stop taking these pills, because I was in the body that I wanted and I didn't need them anymore. However, this was not the case. As it turned out, everything has its consequences. Despite the fact that I stopped drinking them, my appetite did not even think to decrease. I was hungry all day and couldn't bear to be hungry. I even had a headache if I didn't eat. The hunger attacks were so strong that I almost attacked people around me with aggression, and I realized that I was becoming like an animal. I felt uneasy, so I decided to eat, but reduce the amount a little. As it turned out, this was also not a good solution. My figure continued to grow. I grew in breadth more and more. Now, not only was I tall, but I was also gaining in breadth and turning into a rock. Do you know what the most annoying thing is that I couldn't stop in any way? And at a time when I was feeling bad, when I was literally howling with despair, my boyfriend, who swore in love, said that we can't be together anymore because my fat interferes with him. Do you understand that? He said my fat was preventing him from hugging me. These words put me in a hysterical state. I ran home, locked myself in the room again, and began to cry. I didn't want to go anywhere but the kitchen. I ate my sadness with food, and it was worse than when I was thin. In short, from extreme to extreme. I put my gym shirt back on and walked around with my head down. Well, then it dawned on me. If there are drugs for fullness, there should be for weight loss. I went back to that forum and found pills with the opposite effect. The effect was instant. I began to lose weight. And how? You may ask, but it's easy. These pills in me killed my appetite, and I ran to the toilet after every meal. So I began to lose weight rapidly. It took me just a couple of months to get back into the shape that Dave loved me in. As soon as I put on my favorite owl skirts, he began to run after me like a tail, telling me about his motivation. Allegedly, he is a good influence on me, and of course, I melted. I couldn't ignore him because I still loved him. But my happiness this time did not last long. Now that I was off those pills, I had another problem. I couldn't stop throwing up. It was like a nightmare. And then I started losing weight, getting flat again. And what do you think? My boyfriend threw me again. This time it was my bones that got in the way. And again, tantrums. I had a shock, and at the same time, I strangely began to hurt from the inside. When I got home after school, my mother met me with a pack of my fatness and thinness pills. We had a serious conversation, and my mother insisted that I be examined at the hospital. But I refused because I was not ill. My struggles were until one day I was unable to get out of bed due to terrible acute abdominal pain. I felt like someone was stabbing me all the time. I lay there and cried. That's when my mother didn't listen and took me to the hospital. Of course, the doctors were shocked when they heard what I had been doing with myself for a whole year. I was getting fat, then losing weight. Yes, it is violence against yourself. Don't you understand that this is fatal? The doctor told me. Wow, I didn't think it was that serious. It turns out that my body experienced terrible shock and stress because of my experiments on myself. I did everything wrong, but my biggest mistake was that I did it all just to please people, and especially a guy who doesn't even appreciate me as a person. That day, my mother cried a lot and told me one thing, that until I accept and respect myself, people around me will mold me into what they want to see, not paying attention to the fact that I am a person. And all this will be my own fault because I allowed such an attitude to myself. In short, after this story, I never buy any pills on questionable sites without my mother's knowledge. And then I had to spend another year on my treatment and recovery. And as for my figure, I still scurried after beauty, only now, thanks to honest work, proper nutrition, and sports, I look good. 2 years later, Dave decided to hit on me again. Only this time, I paid him back by telling him that his lack of brains got in the way of me approaching him. He left, which I'm glad of. I did have another good friend, but that's another story. So, do not be lazy, friends, and work on yourself. Hi everyone, my name is Aria. My childhood was not like a normal one. I did not play like all the children in the yard with each other. I went to a hot summer camp. Did not go to a friend's house for a sleepover. Did not throw tantrums when I saw new toys. And all because my dad is an admiral. At home, we always had strict rules. It was just the three of us. Dad, Mom, and me. As you understand, my father was in charge of everything. And we lived according to his schedule, even when my mother was always at home. She didn't work, she didn't have any friends, and in the most extreme cases, she went to visit her only sister. My dad is very strict. He believes that discipline is the way to success. But he forgot that we are not soldiers. My mother is a housewife, and I am a schoolgirl. And what success could we talk about? Unquestioning obedience was his main demand, and it came first. My mother and I addressed him as you. He could not even speak, but only showed my mother with his eyes what he wanted, to eat, drink, serve him newspapers, turn on the TV, and so on. But we were lucky in some ways. He was often late at work. Sometimes he didn't come home for several days. These days, my mother and I had so much fun at home. We ate sweets, watched movies late, went to bed together. My mother read me stories loudly, not in whispers. We laughed, played, and danced. That's the side of life I love the most. You know, my mom is great. She fell in love with father and married him when he was very young. My mother often remembered what my father was like when he was only a sergeant. I can't believe it, but from her words, there was no nicer person. She told me that my father ran after her, took care of her as best he could, loved her up to her ears, against the wishes of my grandmother, married my mother, and they had a daughter, me. My mother says that my father adored me. He always carried me in his arms. He spent the money he earned on toys, bought my mother things, jewelry, They did not need anything. And then, when my father was promoted to admiral, something started happening to him. He became withdrawn, service-mad, greedy, angry. I started coming home late and very nervous. And then I started having fun with my mom. I didn't tell her, but I often heard him beating her up. I could hear her crying all night in the bathroom, see the blood on her clothes, the bruises on her body. He hits her everywhere except in the face. So even in summer, my mother wears floor-length dresses or pants and a blouse or long-sleeved shirt on top. Personally, I couldn't remember my father playing with me. I remember him as he is now, sullen, fear-inducing. I knew that my mother's memories of him were completely different, but it didn't help at all to bring back the old man, the sergeant. Once I even suggested that my mother and I run away together, but she was intimidated. I don't know what father told her, but it obviously worked. She dreaded the thought of leaving. "If I leave, he will find me, and then," my mother always said, but she never finished the sentence. I could feel her anxiety and self-doubt, but I had to do something about it. I had to help her and myself, because I didn't have the strength to live in such a nightmare anymore. I decided to talk to her again and again, again and again. It must have lasted more than a week. Every day I started talking about how living with a tyrant is the worst fate, that leaving doesn't mean disgracing yourself, but saving yourself. My mother was crying. I saw how she wanted to leave and couldn't. She was scared, but not me. I packed my bags, put everything I needed in there, money, documents, took them out into the corridor and ran after my mother. I persuaded her to get up and go out the door. The main thing is to start. She went down the stairs and froze. My father was standing in the doorway. He looked at the bag, silently kicked it to the side, motioned for my mother to go to the bedroom, and told me to go to the kitchen. I was sitting on the ground floor behind the kitchen table and heard from the bedroom my mom's sobs and falling furniture. In all my years, I have clearly distinguished the sound of how my father punches my mother in the head, kicks her in the stomach, legs, hands, hits her head on the wall. She tried not to scream so as not to frighten me, but it didn't frighten me. I was used to it. And over time, she became angry. I picked up a knife from the kitchen and went upstairs to find my father yelling at her. He shouted that she would never leave him, and if she did, he would find us, take the child from her, and grind her to powder. My mother begged him to forgive her. She took it upon herself to try to escape. I stood and watched him. A monster. This is not a person. When he grabbed my mother by the throat and started choking her, I ran up behind him and stabbed him. I hit him in the shoulder. He screamed, more out of surprise, I think. Then he swung to hit me. But at that moment, my mother hit him on the head with a vase, and he lost consciousness. She was shaking with fear. We ran downstairs, grabbed our bags, and started running. We understood that my father had very strong connections in law enforcement, and most likely, when he wakes up, he will connect everyone to find us, so we didn't have much time. First of all, we arrived at the train station, bought tickets, and hid in the train compartment. Only there my mother relaxed a little, wiped the blood away, and then hugged me tightly and began to cry. Surprisingly, I wasn't afraid. In a way, I was glad that we had finally escaped from this tyrant. Since then, we've been wandering from city to city. Thank God I knew where the money was stored in the house, so I took everything. This was enough for us to change our image a little, make new documents, rent a house, and eat. Very soon, my mother and I plan to go far away and start life anew. Today is my mother's birthday. I gave her a handmade cake. My mother cried a lot, and then said that I had already given her 2 valuable gifts, myself and freedom. It was nice. I've learned that sometimes adults just need a little determination to make their dreams come true. It's been almost a year since we ran away. Oddly enough, we moved quietly from city to city. We didn't feel any danger or anxiety. We lived as if it had always been so. Who knows? Maybe he finally let us go?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie. Today I will share my story. Maybe you will judge me, but in the end I had to do it. Free myself, so to speak. I sold mine precisely. In general, I will tell you from the beginning. My father was a pilot, and as you know, they are rarely at home, permanent work, training in other countries, business trips. But despite this, I loved it very much and always looked forward to it. Every time he visited a new country, he brought a gift that we thought was a talisman. At times when I missed my dad very much, or when I had bad moments, I would open the box with talismans. They were very reassuring. It was like sitting by the river, watching the current and finding new strength. I had in my collection a rhinoceros from Africa, a silk handkerchief from Turkey, a wax figure from Prague, and many, many other most interesting and unusual things. But the most important of them was the Hierophant stone. This non-ordinary talisman, it was as if there was an unusual amount of energy in it. He gave a lot of strength and self-confidence. I didn't get it easily. This stone is not for sale, and it could only be found in India on a high mountain in a temple. The Buddhists would only entrust this stone to a few, namely those who would bring the letter. In the letter, the future owner of the amulet had to state about himself, views on life, promise to change himself, and treat all living beings with pure intentions and soul. In general, there was a whole book dedicated to this stone and the letter. The Buddhist opened the letter, read aloud, and after which of these stones changed its color from black to blue, he gave it to them. Let me remind you that this happened very rarely. They came from all over the world, and only a few managed to buy this precious stone. Once my father finally took a vacation and we all had to fly to the sea. I took advantage of the moment to persuade to take a vacation to India. To be honest, I spent half a year on the letter, hundreds of times reworked, thought about almost every letter. I prepared carefully for the meeting with the Buddhist, and the rest of my family was a great happiness for me. Therefore, the vacation was long awaited. Well, this moment came, and we went on a journey. The time passed very cheerfully. We spent so little time together, and I tried to enjoy every second of it. On the last day of our trip, my dad and I went to the same mountain. We specifically left it for the last day in case I didn't get the stone, so as to not spoil our vacation. The climb was not easy. On the one hand, it was hard to climb so high, and on the other, I was very worried. Having overcome 1,000 steps, my expectations were fulfilled. I got my long-awaited stone, Hierophant. My intentions were sincere, and the amulet was to my liking. It was the perfect end to a vacation. It was very sad to leave India, but my father promised that we would fly here again in a year. But unfortunately, life has its own plans. After a month off, my father went back to work. On the first day, there was a terrible plane crash. The plane crashed, and my world collapsed with it. The bright, bright days turned to gray. My adolescence aggravated my condition, and that good-natured, cheerful girl died in me. Even after the anniversary of my dad's death, my depression didn't go away. It just kept getting worse. And then my mother decided to move to another city. The psychologist recommended getting rid of all things related to Dad, but we couldn't make up our minds and just left the house and moved to another city with the necessary things. In my memory, the days passed quickly. A new city, a new society replaced my boring, meaningless days. I began to open up to people again, to communicate. This fate and I cannot return and change everything. With such thoughts, I tried to awaken in myself the girl who existed when Dad was alive. It was very difficult to cope. Over time, we had a hard time with money because Dad provided for us. After 5 years, my mother and I were forced to sell the house that we once left in memory of my father, and all things with it. While flipping through the internet, I saw the stone Hierophant. The author wanted to buy it, but I did not pay attention, thinking that someone was just joking and soon forgot about this ad. First of all, I had to sort out my box with talismans. I sat from morning to evening. My head was swimming with thoughts with different memories. I realized that I really missed these gifts. But no matter how much I thought about it, I just couldn't get rid of them and decided to keep everything for myself and find the strength to get back on my feet and go back to my old life. But that amulet brought from India stopped changing its color, probably because I became a person not with an open soul. I stopped being friendly. I was angry, remembering how much time and effort I'd spent on him. I stroked it again and again, but it also remained insensitively black. Out of anger, I decided to get rid of it. I typed the name of the amulet on the internet, and there were 1,000 ads for its purchase. People were willing to give millions for this little amulet. Gradually, my anger turned to excitement, and I imagined how my mother and I could get rich in an instant. I didn't think to put the stone up for sale. From the first day, a dozen calls came, and with each call, the amount for the amulet increased. Greed took possession of me. I was waiting for a buyer who would offer more. More than what amount? I didn't know yet. After much thought, I put up for auction my own, or rather my father's and my amulet. The auction lasted all day, and at the end of it, $2 million was offered for the stone. Without a drop of regret, the next day I handed it to the next owner. At that time, it was the right decision for me. It seemed that I helped my mother, and we got rich. But over time, the anger faded, and the mind came to itself. I felt very bad and ashamed. I forgot the most important thing, that the only owner of the amulet is only me, and the amulet is not worth any money, because this is what's left of my dad. The amulet linked me to past vivid memories of my father. I realized that when I held it in my hand, I could feel my dad's presence next to me, and the energy in him gave me more strength and confidence. Parents' gifts are priceless and can never be returned. My mother reminded me of all this when I handed over the money for the amulet. She cried for a long time, didn't understand why I became so selfish. Along with it, did not understand me. I seem to have sold my loyalty to my father along with the amulet. After all, every item in this treasured box is a part of my father, and the stone was his heart. It's a pity that I realize this only now. And apparently, nothing can be fixed.
Hi, my name is Nick. I was born and raised in prison, and then I was supposed to be sent home to relatives. But I chose boarding school, and now I will tell you why. As my mother said, when she married father, in the family immediately began the problems. Or rather, there were detractors who constantly quarreled with their parents. My dad had a brother, Uncle Chris. He often came to visit us, sometimes to borrow money, then to eat, then to sleep. He didn't work and didn't have a family. My mother thinks that he was jealous of his brother and therefore drank even more. My father loved him and therefore never refused to help. One day my father was offered a good job in another city. It was necessary to go there for the whole week and return home only on weekends. Since the earnings were good, Dad agreed and we didn't see each other 5 days a week. As soon as Uncle Chris found out that Dad was not there, he began to visit us even more often, under the pretext of looking after us. At that moment, my mother was already pregnant with me, although there was no help from him. His mother could not expel him either, out of respect for Dad. Sometimes Uncle Chris could just stay at our house without asking. This irritated my mother terribly. She and Dad even had a fight about it once. He didn't want to listen to Mother in any way. "He is my only brother, and I will take care of him," my father shouted. Well, then Father began to have difficulties at work. He began to come less often, and Uncle Chris stayed more often. So, under the influence of alcohol, he began to molest Mother and harass her. My mother was in a position where she was afraid he might hurt me. Uncle beat her on the back and head, and my mother did everything so that he did not touch her stomach. At some point, she ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. Before he could raise his fist again, she stabbed him. He fell. My mother called an ambulance. When the police arrived, my uncle shouted that she had attacked him and wanted to kill him. My father refused to come after hearing that my mother tried to kill his brother, and my mother was put in prison. That's where I was born. My mother named me after her father. I don't know how it all looked from the outside, but my mom says that my appearance on the bill was supposed to be the best moment of her life, and it was ruined. The fact is that when my mother had contractions for several hours in a row, there was a security next to her all the time. The doctor was late somewhere, and there was no other. During this time, something went wrong with my mother, and she began to lose a lot of blood. People in uniform saw it and did nothing. And when the doctor came and examined her, my mother was handcuffed to the bed so that she wouldn't hurt them or the doctor. Usually when a mother gives birth, her baby is put on her breast. I was deprived of such a moment completely. They took you almost immediately and didn't tell me where you were going. I wasn't even allowed to feed you. I screamed, got angry, and cried, but no one listened to me. I was lying on the bed and just sobbing. I demanded that you be returned, she said. Postpartum recovery takes more than a month. During this time, women should rest, eat well, and not be nervous. My mother was kicked out of work 3 days later. She could not see me again until the next day. I don't know what you were fed or if you were fed at all, but when I did take you in my arms, I finally felt calm. It did not last long. You were ill. You had a fever. I was really scared. For hours I begged for water and a doctor, but my screams were cut off by a rude remark or a blow on the bars with a club. I tried to feed you as much as possible with my milk, but it was not enough, because I did not eat well. You cried a lot and it broke my heart. Women who were in exactly the same situation, with children and behind bars, understood each other perfectly. They were the only ones who helped those who had no relatives. When their relatives brought some things for their kids, or for them, and needed something to eat, they always shared it with me. I was grateful for their gestures, my mother said. Also, according to her, those prisoners wouldn't have done anything like this if it wasn't for the motive for her attempt on my uncle. The prison has its own rules and regulations. I am not talking about the fact that people there observe a special regime. They have their own rules in addition to the basic ones. Each cell has its own rules. For example, in my mother's case, women who heard her story that she almost killed her husband's brother because he attempted to kill her child aroused respect. For this reason, my mother was not touched. But among the other, there were those women who were convicted of horrible crimes, infanticide, for example. They were not liked there. They were not allowed to eat at the common table. They slept on the floor and were treated like dogs. And everything that relatives brought was taken away from them. When I got a little older, it became a little easier. To be honest, since I was born there, on the prison, it seemed to me that this is my home. In fact, it was. My mother and I were always there. In my opinion, there was nothing unusual, because I did not know any other environment. The barbed wire on the high fence didn't bother me. I thought it was necessary. Besides me, there were other children there. We played together while my mother worked. More often, they sewed something. We all wore the same clothes, only sometimes we were visited by other people in more beautiful clothes. They spoke very sternly to us and quickly left. According to the rules, I was only allowed to stay with my mother until I was 3 years old. At the end of the term, my relatives either take me away or send me to a boarding school. My mother said that the day of the separation was the hardest for us. We were both crying. I still remember how bad I felt, how I was afraid to leave my mother. They wanted to give me to my Uncle Chris, as he is a relative. My mother was against it, and I was screaming and hysterical as ever. I didn't want to go to him. Then they decided to transfer me to a boarding school. My mother says that she doesn't know which of the evils was on her at that moment, but she was afraid that Uncle Chris would kill me. That's when I was sent to boarding school. To tell the truth, I didn't see much difference between that house and this one. Here, the order seemed even more disciplined and demanding, because there were more children, and we were already more adults. Yes, here a child of 6 years old on communication poles for 10 years, and all because it is impossible to do otherwise. Otherwise, they will trample. You know, we don't choose our parents. We can't agree or refuse to be born. Sometimes it happens that we have no choice but to accept, whether we want to or not. I don't blame my mom for the fact that has been our fate. Sometimes we are responsible for our parents' mistakes. And yes, I have no idea what life looks like on the other side of the boarding school fence. How does it feel to have a family? Your own house? A lot of food and cartoons, not for 20 minutes a day. All I feel right now is longing for my mother, and I can't wait to visit her again.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gloria, and I have a special gift that I want to share with you now. You'll probably think I'm superhuman, and it will be partly true, because my eyes are not quite normal. The thing is, I've been blind since birth, but I can see more than the sighted. In short, about everything in order, I'll start the story for now, and don't forget to like my story, subscribe to the channel, and write your opinion in the comments. I will be grateful. Well, let's go. As I said, I was born a blind girl. No one knows why this happened. My mother and father are healthy. My mother obediently showed up to the doctor every month, passed tests, and so on. They were very much waiting for me because I am their only child and welcomed. However, my parents were already aged. When I was born, my mother was already 46 years old. It was risky to have children at that age, but what could she do if she and father had only found each other then? My mother told me that when I was born, everything was normal. For the first 2 days, I slept and hardly woke up, and then the doctor noticed that I reacted strangely to light in any way. All my other reflexes worked, but my eyes didn't. I was checked by doctors all over the department, and my mother was already worried because nothing had been explained to her yet. And when it became clear after the results of tests and a consultation of doctors, they came to my mother's room and said that her child was blind. This was a blow to my elderly parents. They were confused and had no idea what to do now. Time passed, and soon they accepted it. They were taught how to take care of their blind daughter, set up the house, and made everything comfortable for me. And then I was 1 year old, and my mother began to notice some strange things. I watched my mother, how she went from room to room, how she came to me. I screamed and cried when I saw her leave the room where I was sitting. At first, she thought I could hear her footsteps, but then she and Dad started experimenting. They walked on tiptoe and noticed that I still seemed to notice them with my eyes. And when my dad brought home my first toy and handed it to me, and then moved it to another corner and I went to it, they realized that I could still see. It was incredible, because in the hospital, all the doctors unanimously assured them that I was blind, that my eyes were not responding. But at the same time, I looked at the doctors, saw their faces. I saw a window, a door, and I went there. I really liked the sunlight, and my eyes longed to look at the sun. My gift became a sensation in the medical field. Many doctors invited me to their homes for free, just to study, look, feel. At first, my parents were willing to drive here and there, but then they got tired, just like me. Then I learned how to talk, and I asked my mom and dad to give it up and let me stay at home. Around the age of 4 to 5, people around me got used to me. My mom and dad bought me special sunglasses so people wouldn't notice my eyes, so no one would ever guess I was blind. But I don't see everything. Some details remain invisible. I saw more silhouettes, energy, and sometimes colors. I also had something that scared my mother. It was only as I got older that I realized what my pictures meant. The fact is that each person had their own color, and it burned next to their heart. Well, how can I explain it to you? It's a kind of soul. Each had its own color. For example, if it was dark, then the person is old, and he will soon die or he is very ill. If it is yellow or orange, it means that everything is fine with it and it is young. Rather, it is a child or a teenager. This way, I could see through almost everyone, including myself. My mother and father were at first afraid of this discovery, but then they also got used to it and kept it a secret from others. This gift helped me in society. When meeting people, I also felt who was good and who was bad, and I tried to avoid the latter and also protected my parents from them. I even went to a school for the blind. By the way, I was not at all embarrassed by the status of a person with disabilities, because I am no worse than others, and as my mother says, on the contrary, I am special. Since then, many years have passed, and I have learned to live with my gift among others. I've communicated, met people, and everything is fine. My mother made me promise that I would never reveal my secret so that there would be no problems, and I agreed with her. Well, once my friends and I went for a walk. It was a sunny day. I loved to bask in the rays. While my friends went to choose a new perfume, I decided to wait for them on the street on a bench. Suddenly, I felt a negative energy. It was coming fast, very fast. I turned my head and noticed that a man was driving at breakneck speed. He was very bad. I felt that he was not sober. And then I heard that a child was running out to the road. It was a girl of 4 years old. Her mother was talking to someone on the side of the road and did not notice how her daughter was running towards the road. The driver saw the child, but he was so drunk that he couldn't even think to stop. I ran to the side of the road, grabbed the child, and pulled him to myself. The car flew past and didn't stop. His mother screamed all over the street. My glasses fell to the ground, and so did my wand for the blind. I was holding the baby in my arms when my friends came out. All the people froze. The mother took the child and began to thank me, and only then realized that I was blind. I saw the frozen questions on people's faces. They were all scared and shocked. Their energy was telling. I couldn't explain anything, so I said I wanted to go home. My friends didn't say a word on the way. They just took me home, kissed me, and left. I had to tell my mother everything. She praised me for my bravery, but now there was a problem, because now I had witnesses. My girlfriends told everyone else, plus passers-by took everything on camera. So fame was assured the next morning. My parents had to pay a tidy sum to keep it in the local press. They wanted me to live a quiet life. About 6 months later, we decided to move to another city, and the story remained a legend. I had to cut all ties with my friends, and my parents also with their friends, because now we have a new life. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing that we're running away from attention, but on the other hand, I'm thinking about how to use my gift correctly. After all, if I saved one life, maybe I can save another. What do you think?
I'm Bjork. My mother named me after the singer. She loved her creativity, acting skills, and found her appearance interesting. So when I was born, my mother didn't even think about the name. Maybe she was hoping that I would be just as talented. I do have a talent, but it's not quite ordinary. Have you ever heard of extrasensory? When I was 5, my grandmother and I went somewhere in the woods. She was leading me by the hand, and in the other, she was dragging a package. When we arrived at the place, my grandmother took out some strange things from it: a candle, bowls, bottled water, a mirror, and maps. She told me that she sees a lot of potential in me and I need to develop it. I will give you all my power, and you will become even more powerful than me, she said. I thought I was going to be a sorceress, and then I'd conjure up a bunch of candy and eat it while my mother wasn't looking. And I almost guessed it. After the ceremony, my grandmother seemed to have aged before my eyes. She looked tired and began to lose weight. She told me not to give up on this case and to make sure I put all my energy into extrasensory. At the time, I didn't understand what it all meant or why. Well, a year later, my grandmother was gone. When 9 days passed after the funeral, I had a dream that Granny was standing and waving at me, saying goodbye and saying, "Don't forget about the power," and leaving. I woke up with strange feelings and went to breakfast. My mother made me an omelet and sat down to eat it. She was talking about something with my dad, and I didn't feel like it. Images of children, toys, and diapers swirled in my head. I turned to my mother and said, "You're going to have a daughter." To be honest, I said it and I didn't know how. Dad looked at Mom and asked when she told me, but Mom turned her head and told him that she didn't tell me anything. They looked at me as if I were an alien, and I quickly ate my omelet and went into my room. Yes, my mother was pregnant, and she and my father didn't know how to report it. In short, since then, the most interesting things began. As I predicted, 8 months later, another girl appeared in our family. She grew up a wonderful beauty. I named her Sophia in honor of my grandmother. We loved each other very much. She always calmed down only in my arms, and I understood what she needed, even better than my mother. I don't know if we had a special bond or if I did have abilities. Time quickly flew by. Sophia turned 9 years old. During all this time, I have not had any unusual situations. I already thought it would not happen. Maybe my grandma really was a bit of a dreamer. Then, a happy dad flies into my room and says that tomorrow we are going to the countryside with the whole family to celebrate his promotion at work. Mom prepared some goodies, we found a suitable place in the clearing, and had a picnic. While my father was lighting the grill and my mother was putting out the food, I noticed that Sophia was nowhere to be found. I sounded the alarm, and my parents started looking for her in a panic. My mother was crying and hysterical. All of a sudden, the same feeling came over me as before. I closed my eyes and saw that Sophia was walking near the river. She was scared, trying to find her way back, but she couldn't. I called my father and asked where the river was. It was not far over the hill. We ran there. Sophia was sitting there. She saw us and was happy. Half an hour later, my parents came up to me and cautiously asked me how I knew this. I told them about my grandmother. Dad was very scared, but Mom understood what was going on. When she got home, she talked to me again and told me that she was supposed to be the successor, but she had not enough strength, so my grandmother chose me. My mother gave me some tips on how to develop my gift, how to manage and control visions, and then gave me a book that explains how to summon the spirits of the dead. From that day on, I began to study hard, deliberately conjuring up visions. A year later, I could easily talk to the spirit of my grandmother. She advised me what to do. About my family and what is not worth it, rumors spread all over the city and people started coming to our house. I didn't know them for the first couple of minutes, but when I touched their hand, their clothes, looked into their eyes, or looked into their open soul, I knew everything they were worried about. My grandmother was with me every session. It prompted and guided me. In this way, we managed to help dozens of people. The people called me a witch. I was famous not only for my abilities, but also for my age. Because I was young, I could do several sessions a day. The flow of people increased more and more. People thanked me, brought me gifts, money, food, whatever they could. We did not demand anything in return. Everything was done in good faith. My little sister Sophia always asked curiously about tomorrow, what grade she would get if she didn't learn it. It was fun to watch her. My parents built a special room for me. There was nothing magical, no strange accessories hanging on the walls. No, all I needed was silence, a lit candle, and the spirit of my grandmother. We already had our own clients who brought their friends and came themselves almost every month. They were big businessmen and very impatient. They came to the next session with a request for advice on business and partners. I did not refuse, but they were not used to waiting. A man boldly pushed through the queue and came to me. This angered me. I told him that I would not accept him today, that this is not the way to behave. To which he replied, "What am I paying you for? It's none of your business. My mother will raise me." I was angry, very angry, and I chased him away. He left, saying I'd be sorry. The bastard waited until the evening when I was tired. I went out of the house to the store to buy some groceries. When I was almost home, they put a bag over my head. I could have predicted it if I wasn't so tired. They kidnapped me. This horrible, greedy family wanted me to work for them. How vile they are! They brought me to their home, although it's more like a palace. I realized that greed is their priority. They untied me and threatened to kill me if I didn't agree to be their personal fortune teller. I wasn't afraid in the least, but I was angry. So angry that I wanted to punish them. I closed my eyes and was about to summon the spirit of his dead father to strike at the sick man. But my grandmother appeared before me. She told me not to do it, not to stoop to their level. She said everything would be fine, but I needed to trust her. The man hit me in the face and became nervous. "Come on, make me get more money," he shouted. I waved my head, and his wife joined in. This family seems to have gone completely mad. She came up to me with a small knife and threatened to cut my face. That's when I saw my death. This woman didn't want to kill me, but she hit me and missed, hitting an artery in my neck. I died of blood loss. At that moment, it was as if cold water had been poured over me. My grandmother's spirit was standing next to me, and that man was sitting in front of me. I was in my room. and he came for the first time. "Hello, this is the first time I've come to see you," he said. "I realized that my grandmother showed me the future that shines if I accept it. I was scared and advised the client to perform a certain ritual that supposedly will bring a lot of money at work. It didn't work, of course, and they didn't come to me again. Do you think you can't cheat fate? In my case, I built it myself. 3 years have passed since then. I changed the policy in my business, began to help not everyone, but only those who really need my help."